and we're certainly looking forward to hearing the insights from our panel today. Neil Scales, who's the Director General of the Department of Transport and Main Roads Queensland. Welcome, Neil. Nick Fowle, who's the Head of Transport Services, Department of Transport Victoria. Lovely to see you. Joost de Kock, who's the Deputy Secretary, Customer Strategy and Technology Transport for New South Wales. And Alison Playford, Director General, Transport Canberra and City Services Directorate in the ACT. Thank you all so much for joining us. And our panel moderator for the afternoon is the fabulous Simon Barrett, who's Senior Partner and Chairman of L.E.K Consulting. So Simon, on that note, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thanks, Margy. Good afternoon, everyone. We've got a great panel with a skew to the East Coast to talk us through what happened in public transport in 2020, and more importantly, to do some crystal ball gazing and think about what might happen next year and beyond. I thought I might ask the four of you just to start with a very short summary of the year that was. I guess if this was an AFL game of football, the four quarters have felt very, very different through the year. I'd just love to get a first impression from each of you as to how it's panned out, and maybe we might go from north to south just to get to you last, Nick, because I think you might have some of the most interesting war stories. Neil, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, thanks, Jen. Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here. I think it's been a year like no other. You know, a week in COVID-19 world is like a month in normal world, and I don't think we'll ever go back to pre-COVID life as we knew it then. I think the change that's been wrought on us by this this coronavirus is certainly going to change everything. But we've gone from starting off the containment activities in mid-January with our ports to where we are now in rebuilding, and closing the borders for the first time in 100 years was a bit special, I think. And where we are now is sort of on the slow climb back to patronage to where it used to be, and I think it will be a very slow climb back. So just focusing on public transport, we dropped about 80% of our patronage from January, February onwards, and now it's slowly climbing back, and we're about 30% down now. We took a view that we should operate a full bus, rail, ferry and tram service for essential workers to get them into work and out of work and all that sort of stuff. I think in summary, Simon, I'll let other people speak now, but it's a year like no other. So we're seeing two things now. One is it's business as unusual, and we shouldn't be wasting a good crisis. And one of the things that has happened on a positive note is that we've got cashless in on our bus network, which I've been trying for 8 years to get in and got nowhere. We just did it overnight and said, there's just no cash handed across to the driver. So as 96% of our transactions were by contactless go card anywhere, it was a fairly simple change. But I'll shut up for now and then let others have a go. But I think a year like no other, and I don't think life's ever going to be the same again.
Some good themes there we will come back to, Neil. Joost, give us the New South Wales.
Yes, thanks, Simon. A bit of a similar story, a very challenging, a very unusual year. Actually, I joined in the beginning of transport, in the beginning of March. I joined in Transport New South Wales, and within 2 weeks, I was in lockdown. So I had to learn all about my new roles and meet all my colleagues and others while working from home. And a little bit, as Neil said in the beginning, I think we were just dealing with the pandemic, with a substantial drop, 80% drop in our public patronage, setting up the task force, the need of having and the need and appetite for data to manage the pandemic. Then there was sort of the middle of the year when the restrictions started to ease. There was a lot of focus on putting new technology solutions in place to support safe return to our networks. And then really over the last sort of 3 months, we started to pivot more into thinking about revitalizations. What are the positives that we can take from this COVID crisis, and then move forward. And although we don't have a crystal ball going forward, I think there are many things that have changed that will give us some opportunities to change the way our public transport networks work. and including things like just active transport, which I'm sure we'll talk about more later this morning or this afternoon.
Thanks, Joost. I'm getting a little bit of interference. I hope others are getting that as well. There seems to be a slight gremlin on the line, but we'll keep an eye on it and see if it behaves itself. Alison, my friends in Canberra tell me it's been astoundingly normal down there for much of the year. How's it felt for you?
Well, it didn't start very normal, and in fact, pre-COVID, Q1 for Canberra was all about managing the bushfires around the south coast, around Canberra, and the threat to Canberra in sort of January, February, and the city was clouded in thick smoke, which absolutely impacted as much, if not more, on public transport usage than COVID did. In February, we emerged from the smoke to have our highest ever patronage figures on public transport, to March, similar to what others have said, to have them drop 85% the next month. So it was ups and downs. So second quarter for us, taking on your footy analogy, was all around scenario planning, and we showed how good we were at business continuity planning and completely pivoting our business, and we showed how resilient we were and were able to introduce some ways of cashless, etc., almost overnight. The safety of our workers was a really big focus, and having our workers be able to safely transport members of the public who needed, like Queensland and some of the other jurisdictions, we maintained our schedules through the whole period, so those who needed to rely on public transport to do their essential work could, and our bus drivers were essential workers who we needed to make their workplace safe. So there was a whole lot of pivots to allow that to happen. Q3 for us was all around, I guess we had an ACT election as we were going through the easing of restrictions. In public transport sense, we've seen slow and steady uptake, and Q4 is all about looking into the future, and things won't be what they were. There is some structural changes that we'll look at going forward, and it's about looking at what we can leverage going forward. Probably enough for me.
Thanks, Alison. That's great. It's can I just ask what patronage level are you back to now? Neil said he was down about 30%. Where are you sitting?
We're probably down about just around 30% as well, actually. I just looked at the stats. Someone said, 69. So that's 30% down.
We'll circle back to that. One of the things I'm fascinated by is the fact that number seems remarkably similar around the country, Melbourne, despite the very different sort of COVID journeys that we've been on.
It was remarkably similar all the way through the year. We tracked almost exactly. But morning peaks and school leaving peaks are probably even higher, and that's where we're, I guess, having to pay some particular attention.
Nick, do you want to round us out with the opening remarks?
Thank you, Simon. Terrific to be with you all. Coming to you from the Wurundjeri, land of the Wurundjeri people here in Victoria. We have had a very different experience to many other parts of the country, and I would go with my network operations team call it a year of unplanned disruptions. So if you come from bushfires, as Alison alluded to, straight into COVID. For us, it's a kind of the stories around cadence, reform, and recovery. The cadence of decision making. We did 99 crisis cabinet committee meetings in that period up to the end of the second lockdown before we've gone back to a normal cabinet schedule. So that's sort of three a week, and the protocol burden around a cabinet process doesn't get any less the more of them you do. So the cadence of the public service has been astonishing. The reform opportunities have been immeasurable, and like other jurisdictions, we've grasped some of those nettles as well and taken the opportunities. And then, of course, we're now into the recovery phase after the astonishing kind of turnaround that Victoria's had, which is in, you've got to give credit where credit's due to some excellent public servants and political will that got us to here, and the will of the Victorian people, which has been absolutely brilliant. So to the network question, we're still 63% down. So we're back to 47% on the network on Friday, which is a really strong result. That's sort of up 20% week on week. So we are coming back off a lower base, but we were at 98% down during the lockdown, and we were still running a full service offer for essential workers in the rest. So roads back to 97%. So we're we're seeing that this sort of a bit of mode shift happening there, I think. But happy to expand on any of that as we go into the conversation, Simon.
No, there's a couple of great themes in there. We'll talk about mode shift and the rebound. Maybe just before we, and should I just offer my own congratulations, Nick, for what, the Victorian government and the Victorian citizens have done down there. It's a truly remarkable effort. I think there's almost nowhere in the world that's managed to bring down, that infection rate the way Victoria did. And there is no question the benefits are national, even though the sacrifice was Victorian. There's national benefits for us all. I saw a lot of Jerome in that period too.
He's doing a remarkably good job.
Yeah. Obviously public transport's a great training ground for crisis management. Curious about, what it felt like particularly in, sort of March, April, when we really were on that sort of very steep part of the curve, particularly in terms of managing all of the different, dare I say, bushfires that were going off, everything from staff safety to, to passenger safety, thinking about the cliff that emerged in revenues. Just curious to hear what Q2 felt like and what the biggest challenges were as we went into that very scary, few weeks from sort of mid-March onwards. Nick, do you want to just keep going through that since you had the conch?
Yeah, sure. And, if you remember February, the advice from WHO at the time was sort of wash your hands. So, we didn't know a lot. And so the hotel quarantine system was set up. There was a lack of, real understanding, even though we had Brett Sutton, who was ahead of the pack in terms of his advice for wearing of masks and the rest. So we're working with this changing landscape of maturity of knowledge, and then having to adjust very, very quickly to introduction of mandatory masks or other measures such as that. The decision making had to be really fast, had to be steeped in evidence, and we had to turn around a range of different policy implications. Going cashless was, again, overnight for us, moving employees home, customer service hotlines, all, whole call centres working from home. So all of that was done overnight. But it came from a point where we thought, we were doing pretty well on that suppressing the first wave, and then all of a sudden the second wave got out of control, and so there was a real sense of shock in the community about that, and indeed, right through the public service about how we were going to respond to that. I think the level at which the public service worked together, I've never seen greater cooperation and collaboration before in all my years of service. People just worked across boundaries, reached out to each other to come up with alternative solutions. You saw a skills exchange. Jerome going over to Department of Health to head up, the testing regime was a really good example. We had the health department having twin execs in every single role because they were working 24/7. And we also saw, some really good career public servants not transition through this period, and that was also quite a shock through the service. So I'd have to say everybody just knuckled down and did what needed to be done, but there was a real kind of fear and anxiety in the community about when we got to 775 infections a day. And then to bring it back from there, as you say, has been a remarkable effort. But that period in the intervening period when we were having to set up new systems of government, new departmental responses, as well as manage this second outbreak was pretty frightening time for everyone, actually.
Yeah, Joost, you were in about week 2 of your new job. What was some of the biggest, apart from the obvious, What were some of the biggest challenges you faced through those month or two?
Personally, of course, as I just joined and I saw 80% of our customers disappear within sort of the first sort of few weeks was quite disconcerting. But for me, it was a time of a lot of fast change. And just like the other jurisdictions, we kept all our public transport services running, so essential workers could continue to travel safely and do what they had to do. Pretty much from the first moments, we stood up a task force to be able to deal with all the questions that were coming every day. And the task force also worked very closely with other parts of governments. And what I saw even in my first month is an incredible collaboration across the different agencies and departments to solve problems. The other thing that we saw, it wasn't, as I mentioned before, a demand for lots of information and data. And it was not good enough to have a weekly report. Everybody wanted pretty much real-time information, and we provided some dashboards where we could actually see where all our transport assets were at in near real time. And that helped our task force a great deal to deal with a lot of the questions and decisions that they had to make. And we also we provided that information to the central agencies, the customer service department, then who can join up the information from health and other agencies to get a total state picture. And I think that really helped very well with the response. And in parallel with all of this, through the health orders, all our non-frontline staff, so about 10,000 people, had to move and work from home and shift working from home, all in the space of 1 or 2 weeks. And it's remarkable that people could do that in such a short time frame. And we found that actually all the technology that we had at our fingertips actually worked pretty well. So it was an amazing shift to do all of this while 10,000 people actually completely switched their ways of working in a matter of a couple of weeks. So no, a lot of change and a lot of decisions had to be made fast. But just as I heard from the others, a great sense of collaboration and trying to solve problems fast using information that was at people's fingertips. And so that was probably sort of the first phase of the initial sort of response to this pandemic.
Yeah, I think we've all wondered what this would have been like in the mid-80s without the internet, without mobile phones. You know, how would we have coped if the same thing had hit us 30 years ago? It would have been very, very different. Alison and Neil, you're from territories that, let's face it, have had far fewer cases than either New South Wales or Victoria. And yet the response in terms of travel patterns has by my estimation, been remarkably similar. And I've seen the same thing when you look at the numbers in Perth. But just curious to sort of hear from you why you think that is. What is it that's made passengers in jurisdictions that have not had as many cases behave quite similarly, actually, to places that had a lot more?
Well, I'm happy to kick off, Neil, if that's okay. I think for Canberra, people probably perhaps a little bit more cautious and pretty well-educated public service population with a lot of office workers who had made that switch to working from home. And so I think, you know, when things initially sort of shut down in March, people were cautious. So, you know, from June, we started to really, or end of May, ease restrictions and didn't have community transition. But we were very conscious, and I think, you know, seeing what was happening in other jurisdictions made us very careful, and that impacted on travel patterns. And the fact that, you know, we do have a large population who are office-based who had made that transition to working from home in that period very successfully, meant that flexibility and that we could still achieve, you know, productivity with the technology that we had.
Yeah, makes sense. Neil?
Yeah, thanks for that. And very similar to Alison, where because we had a huge amount of our staff working from home, at one stage it was 44%, which is 44% of over 9,000 staff working from home. That had a huge effect on travel. And travel on our network is determined in part certainly by the people who work in the city centre, and with a lot of public servants here that were working from home. That was a major determinant. But it wasn't just us. There was the private sector that were working from home as well. And if you take the big four consultancy companies, for example, they don't really need to be in an office anywhere. And I think that's going to be one of the repercussive effects we see, that, you know, you've got a lot of pension funds that have buildings in every city. And you're going to see a readjustment there, because we're not going to need the same office space as we move forward. But we just had like 3 simple messages for the network, which was basically leave a gap, adjust your travel, and there's plenty of capacity out of the peaks, and keep it clean. And we spent, you know, like everybody else, an enormous amount of money on disinfecting the hard surfaces on bus, rail, ferry and tram. So I think that's helped a lot. And the other thing we did as well, we extended the shoulders of the peak Monday to Friday on the 10th of August. So put new bus services in and new rail services, some of which on the bus service side we're going to keep. So I think as we've gradually got to return back to work, and we're now about 18% of our staff can work from home at least 2 days a week. And one of the things that we're trying to do, for example, is make sure they're not taking a Monday or Friday off, so have a long weekend. You know, and some people don't like working Wednesdays because it breaks into both weekends. So that was a joke, by the way. So we're trying to sort of move things around so we can gradually get people to return. But there's still a lot of not disquiet, but uncertainty about, are you safe on public transport? So, you know, TTF this morning sort of announced stuff about, you know, making the wearing of masks mandatory. We're taking health advice and advice from UITP, which is basically, if you feel that you need to wear a mask, do so. I came in on the bus last Wednesday morning on the 444, and it was a half a load and I didn't feel the need to have a mask. The other thing we've done from today, we've launched something called a service capacity tracker. So we go on our website. If I look at the 444 at 5:56 from, you know, the bus stop I can see what the capacity is on an updated basis. So it's allowing people to make decisions on, you know, moving their travel, you know, slightly to the right or the left or even like that. So I think the major determinant, Simon, is basically the amount of people working in the CBD. You know, a lot of folk, and it's not just public servants, have been working from home and working very effectively. And we're finding that is a specific positive that we're getting from coronavirus. The issue that I've got, though, is if you take a normal commute like today, there's a start point and an end point. If you're working from home, that start point's still there, but don't really know where the end point is. So we're having to wrap our arms around our staff to make sure that they're supported, because I see issues, particularly next year, maybe with, you know, mental health coming to the fore. So we're making sure we've got lots of support in place. So I think the major determinant's been a lot of people in CBDs actually, you know, not wanting to travel or traveling less.
So if we begin to turn the focus of the conversation to what happens now, I think around the country, road volumes seem to have bounced back to 100% of what they were before. Public transport, with the exception of Melbourne, is sort of getting back to 60 to 70%. And a number of you have talked about mode shift, but also work from home as a sort of ongoing, you know, lifestyle change. What sort of scenarios are you playing with in terms of volumes for next year and the year beyond? Do you see things getting back closer to normal in 2021, 2022, or do you think actually this is a semi-permanent change, and in fact we have to get used to a new normal even once the immediate sort of COVID crisis has passed us?
I'll go first if you want. I think it's a new normal, and I think it will take 3 to 5 years to get anywhere near where we were pre-COVID. If you look what's happening, not necessarily in Australia, but what's happening on the London Underground, for example, or the New York subway, where people are just not prepared to be crammed up together. And one of the other benefits I think, and there are some benefits of COVID-19, I guess, is that influenza cases have dropped by over 90%, which means that, you know, older people or people with underlying respiratory problems or other medical problems aren't dying from influenza. So I think that might be an ongoing benefit, and we'll see how effective the serums are when they all come out. But I think this change is probably with us, particularly the home working side and the effects that's having. I think these changes are here.
Yeah.
Foreseeable future. We're going to have to adjust the systems to actually take care of that. And the next point is, well, what's your solution, Neil? Well, the solution is going to be mobility as a service. I think we're investing, as colleagues are in Australia and in the world, ongoing for individual transport solutions, not necessarily mass transit solutions. So what does that mean? It means more walking, cycling, combination of public transport and maybe shared taxis, maybe all sorts of other things. But I see a shift from, mass transit solutions to more individually tailored solutions.
And Joost, how does that fit with the emerging view on next year and beyond in New South Wales?
Well, I think as with the other jurisdictions, we've seen a huge shift of mobility of our customers, especially working much more from home. And we think that will probably continue to some degree, although that is still a big unknown. And we've seen people spending more time in the locality. Also, they, in terms of how they buy more goods online, they consume more digital services. So I think we can maybe imagine a world where many more employees who are not frontline will continue to work flexibly from home, at least part of the week. We could see perhaps more vibrant local centres as people commute less on a daily basis. And one of the research that we found is that when people don't commute as much, the hour or so per day that they save, 1/3 they use for work and the 2/3 they use for leisure. So we've seen a recently increased usage of parks and other recreational facilities. But on the flip side, we've seen some of our CBD, especially the CBD with a lot of office workers, the level of visitation has dropped. And even still now, it's like half the level it used to be. So going forward, then we probably need to think about how does those CBDs change, perhaps increase the shopping, entertainment, more residential work, but also thinking about extending them to operate in 24 hours. So if that world I just described materializes, and again, we're not quite sure, it could take years to play out what that actually would look like, we'll have to adopt our transport network, maybe to, if people don't commute on and commute off peak, we need to maybe think of more all-day networks, including nighttime travel to spread the peak. Maybe we'll have to have more transport solutions that connect the local centres and precincts, so more of a network. And as Neil said, we think active transport will play a bigger role in many of the shorter trips and also point-to-point. And in the Sydney CBD, we put 6 pop-up cycleways, and about 15,000 people use that. That's about 15,000 trips per week. So I think we're going to have quite a big change. I don't think it's going to be a new normal. We're not quite sure how that will pan out. And I think for me, the key thing is what the persistence of working from home will be going forward, which is a bit of an unknown.
Just before I turn to Alison and Nick, I just wanted to remind the audience to submit any questions that you have. Margy Osmond is sitting eagerly by her keyboard and is keen to hear some questions, which we'll turn to in 10 or 15 minutes or so. Nick and Alison, maybe Nick first, crystal ball gazing for you next year. Are you in a place where you can think about that yet, or not quite?
Yeah, look, we absolutely are doing many of the same things around capacity indicators. We're seeing, we were seeing a change in our system anyway, with the trips on the network being more diverse. About a quarter of trips are point-to-point going to or from work. There's lots more shopping, there's lots more students, there's lots more incidental visiting family, friends and relatives. CPV, commercial passenger vehicles, were up by 130%. Bus use was in decline. Train and tram use was increasing. So we were seeing changes in the way the city was working pre-COVID. And I think we're going to see more of that. To Neil's point, the mobility as a service offers, and we're trialling some of that with smaller bus fleets at the moment in some parts of Melbourne. So definitely into that space, putting as much technology and information and data in the hands of our consumers as we can, and having them make smarter choices about how they might navigate the network, being mode agnostic themselves. It's like Ford or Holden down here, you know, tram or train or bus. You choose one and you stick to it. Is kind of been the patterns of life up until now, and you know that sort of thing will change into the future as the city changes. To your point about CBDs, Melbourne has had a very, very active postcode 3000 since 1980, I think, of people living in the CBD. So we have much more residential activity in the CBD. That's fantastic about helping with its vibrancy. But footfall drives retail rents. So if we don't get the footfall back above 65%, then you'll see massive retail rent values drop, and the super funds that own those properties will take a bit of a hit. So there is an economic recovery lens to getting people back to the CBD as well. But it's not just about the CBD. I think Joost to put it eloquently. It's about local trips, local shopping centres, strip shops. Those sorts of things might be on the comeback. Regional Victoria will be on the comeback. Part of our economic advantage is our compact diversity down here, is what our tourism people tell us all the time. That, you know, you can ski in the morning and surf in the afternoon, and we've got a fabulous regional train network that can move you around the system.
Thanks, Nick. Alison?
Well, much of what's already been said is under consideration. We've got a transport recovery plan well underway, which is looking kind of into the longer term. Personally, I think shorter term we'll have a much better sense if we get through the summer. I think with the borders all opening, there's a sort of another sense of scenario planning around the next few months, in a sense that when we get to February next year and, you know, school resuming and stuff, might be a point where we have a better sense of what the rest of the year is going to look like. I think we've learnt from this year that you have to mix your long-term planning with short-term flexibility. And so working through what the different scenarios might look like when we get to sort of February, March next year is something we've been talking about. We released our transport strategy in September this year, which did talk a lot about integrated transport systems as well. And we did see resurgence of active travel. We're very fortunate with our road network in Canberra, but there's still a big theme through our election campaign, looking at the climate change emergency that our government's committed to addressing. In the longer term is a continued investment in public transport with short-term economic stimulus, infrastructure recovery. We are looking for opportunities for a lot of small upgrades to parts of our public transport system, stop upgrades, active travel links to public transport, those sorts of things, taking advantage, as Neil eloquently putting it, leveraging off a good crisis to, I guess, improve our network where we can as part of that construction activity, which is so important for the economic recovery as well as the CBD type focus.
Yeah, can I pick up on that? Because it's sort of, it seems to me there's a bit of a tension at the moment between the desire for stimulus and to create jobs, which is, you know, people are keen to push on with projects, but given everything that's happened, an obvious question is, well, does the project pipeline need to be revisited in light of the trends we've seen? Maybe that's too early. Just curious and happy for any one of you to raise your hand and jump in. Is there a logic for revisiting the public transport project pipeline right now, or do we just keep spending because we need to spend the stimulus? Neil?
I think it's the stimulus that we need to spend to get ourselves out of the economic problems that we've got, with the whole world's got. So I think I'm a Keynesian engineer, not a monetarist engineer. And I think we need more infrastructure, more ports, more airports, more roads, and more public transport. As you know, our population will recover and start upticking, and then once the world has the serum, which, you know, our budget here in Queensland and the federal budget's predicated on being in and, you know, being effective by third quarter next calendar year, I think we'll need the stimulus that those jobs will bring. So I don't think we can pause it. I think what we can do is, you know, the professionals that's, you know, online and on the panel, try and cast forward and say, right, what does it mean? And if you take the tourism bit, and we're encouraging everybody to holiday in Australia, and there's a lot of fantastic things to see in Australia. you need a good transport network to get there. So I think for the short term, any investments we're making in the tourism side are certainly going to pay dividends, because that infrastructure will always be there. So I think for me it's two issues. One is we need the stimulus. Governments of all persuasions, federal, state and territory and local, are actually all pointing in the same direction, which is partly to build our way out of difficulty. But if you take the tourism bit of TTF, what we need to do is make sure the transport network supports the tourism side. So I think for the first time in a long time, we've got a significant push forward. And I think the other thing is, again, not wasting a good crisis. I think we're all propelling forward the use of AI. We're all propelling forward the use of data. So we'll be data-driven and intelligence-led. We've all got stacks and stacks and stacks of data, but is it relevant? That's the thing.
Yeah. Nick, I saw you nodding in agreement there. The intent's the same in Melbourne, is it?
Yeah, look, the big build down here will continue, Simon, and the recent announcements of Melbourne Airport Rail Link, that's economic infrastructure, something that, organisations like TTF have been advocating for many, many years. So, to Neil's point, absolutely, we're going to build ourselves on our way to recovery, but also make sure it's economically responsible infrastructure that's going to create more jobs and more outcomes for other people to share in the benefits of that. Airport rail links are a great example. Suburban rail links are a really great example of a new post-COVID normal where suburbs and distributed transport networks are occurring in suburban areas of larger cities. So I think that's a really good example for a piece of infrastructure that's going to play well in a post-COVID environment.
Yeah,
as well as creating a heap of jobs on the way through.
Many would argue that we were somewhat behind on the infrastructure build anyway, so maybe this just allows us a little breathing space to catch up. So we're going to keep spending on major projects, but clearly Farebox has taken a hit, and some will ask, what happens? Does government just take that on the chin, or at some point are we going to have to pay more for the people we are carrying? Anyone want to touch the delicate question of cost recovery and fares?
I'll have a go. I think when I was in the UK, I think the farebox recovery rate, the best we ever saw, was about 60%, and that wasn't on the UK. It was actually in Germany, I think. So I think farebox recovery, unless you're in Hong Kong or Singapore, I think it's always going to be negative. We've taken a view here, though, that by operating a full bus, rail, ferry and tram service, those people that actually, provide that service have at least had the benefit of an ongoing and continuous source of income. And I reckon if we did, and I'm not an economist, but if we did the balance, I think actually providing that full service and providing the people that operate that service with a wage has probably done more benefit economically than chopping the services to bits. And we all know as transport professionals, if you chop something, then getting it back up again is always really hard. Plus, if the 18 bus operators that's in the area, apart from Brisbane Transport, that's operated by the council, they're all in the private sector. So if I try to chop the services, there'd be a huge row about, well, it's a force majeure. And I would say, well, no, it's not, because you can insure against a pandemic. You've just chosen not to. And then, their lawyers would come to our lawyers, and then the lawyers would make lots of money out of it, but the travelling public wouldn't. So I think there's an economic case to keep it going for now, to be honest, chat.
Yeah. Joost, is there any sense in New South Wales that something has to be done about the farebox hit? I'm sure Treasury's not happy about it, but they're under assault on many fronts.
It's fair to say that the farebox has taken a hit as the patronage has dropped, but we have kept all our services running since the beginning of the pandemic. But we did actually change our pricing for our Sydney and outer metropolitan, our Opal fares. But in totality, the customers don't have to pay more. We changed the fare structure a bit. So we introduced more off-peak discounts. So initially in July, we introduced 50% off-peak until October. and now it is 30% off-peak for all modes except ferries. We also we had different caps in between Saturday and Sunday, so we equalized, so our caps are the same between Saturday and Sunday to even the spread of patronage during the weekend. And we extended our peak hours a bit. So and we kept all the remaining OPAL benefits in place in terms of some of the daily and weekly caps and so forth. So we definitely changed our pricing to encourage more off-peak travel, and both during the middle of the day and towards either very early or late at night. And we have actually over the last since the pandemic started seen a flattening of our transport of our daily transport curve, so which is of benefit for us.
Alison, Neil mentioned Never Waste a Crisis, and various others have mentioned innovations that have been much easier this period. Cashless travel, a number of you mentioned, using boardings data and loadings data to tell customers what's going on in the next service. What are some of the best innovations you and your team have either implemented yourselves or seen in other networks that you'd like to mimic?
Look, we have implemented many of the ones that have been already discussed, the cashless, and that's something we'll be talking to government about continuing, because there's certainly a lot of benefits to the system as a whole of continuing that way. The data, and we developed an online tool very quickly, very early on, so people could see patronage of each particular service, and that was something we've, was a sort of one of those innovations that we'll now hang on to. And I think we'll better use our data and think about things around how we plan the network. We had a network upgrade that was due to roll out in April, which we put on hold to avoid confusion, but we actually went ahead with it in July, and that provided additional services, which again helped to spread that load. As people started to reuse public transport, we had additional capacity as well. So I think all of those sorts of things, but I look just the innovation and the resilience, and we're all a lot better at doing business continuity and scenario planning. So whatever new thing 2021 throws at us, I'm confident actually we've got plans that are in a lot better shape than they were back in 2019, and we're more agile and flexible, which I think is a real positive for any organisation as we move forward.
Yeah, without question. Joost, did you want to jump in on that?
Yes, I think for us going ahead, data analytics and technology is going to be really key. And it's just like the other jurisdictions, we introduce physical capacity monitoring, pretty much real time and then predictive. And then recently we wanted to make that proactive. So customers who sign up for it and who travel on our train, we can look at their historical travel patterns and pick the normal journey that they take. And so if this, we can send them proactive notifications that either their service is fine for physical distancing, or it's actually very full for physical distancing and suggest a different one. So this is what, and we're using some AI to do that type of analysis with the customer permission. So it's a good example how we're going to use data and technology more and more to inform customers, but also things like smart motorways and also using our sensor network, whether it's our sensors that sit in our traffic networks and so forth, to really have more intelligence decision engines to help manage congestion and incidents, and also connecting that into the various front end tools and the customer tools right into their phones. So for me, technology and data, I think it's going to be we can really accelerate that, and we saw the power of that over the last 6 months, I would say.
It's very impressive technology. Maybe it can tell me whether I should go to the office or not, because some days I get up and I'm not quite sure. Maybe you know before I do, yes. Neil or Nick, best innovation of the year?
Look, in the theme of not wasting a good crisis, untangling the city loop has been a long-held desire, and we've recently announced another 450 services that will untangle the city loop for the arrival of metro trains in 2025. So that's been a long-held goal in the service for a very long time. We've managed to achieve that. I'd also echo Joost's comment on the smart networks. So we've again dusted off a proposal that was probably first put about 3 years ago in terms of getting a much more intelligent network and covering all the dark information spots in the network. And we're rolling out literally hundreds and hundreds of new CCTV and Bluetooth sensors right across the network. And increasing capacity in the signalling and the chain in the traffic management centres. All of that work is happening in the background, employing a lot more signallers because they're few and far between. So, you know, they're not necessarily new ideas. They've been things that have gone up for budget considerations in the past and haven't been successful. But in the light of COVID, it's good public policy. It's really well argued, and you know, it was the time to re-prosecute some of those ideas, and we got them through.
Neil, you get the last comment before I turn to Margy for the Q&A.
I think basically we've gone like other colleagues in all the hard system stuff that we're doing, you know, investment in technology, better use of data, all that sort of stuff. But one of the things I've found is the soft system side, where because we've been ramping up the communications, because if you don't tell the staff and tell our stakeholders what's going on, they'll make it up. So I think we feel a lot closer to the staff than we did before. And I think that's helped enormously. And I think just the level of trust has gone up a lot. And pre-COVID, to actually work from home, even to be considered, you had to be able to leap tall buildings with a single bound, find a cure for cancer before breakfast, quell riots, rescue maidens, and generally be an all-round good person. Now, all that's gone. You know, if you can work from home, we'll let you work from home. And I think the level of trust has just gone up quantum leap. And I think that's going to be one of the benefits we see on the soft system side rather than just the hard system side.
Yeah, without doubt. Thank you all very much. I will pass the microphone back to Margy, who's going to curate some Q&A that's been coming in while we've been chatting.
Thanks so much, Simon, and thank you all very much for your thoughts and insights. What I'm going to do is actually roll a few questions into one, because I think you've covered such a huge breadth of territory. We've had a question about, do we see that there's going to be more of the sort of zero emission buses and those highly technical innovations as a result of, I suppose, the hiatus that COVID gives us to perhaps play with the system. And the other one was the changing work patterns also as a major change to the system. Is this the best opportunity we've ever had to try and figure out a way of staggering peaks? I might start with you, Steph, because I know New South Wales has just made a fairly big announcement about Zeb. Over to you. Oops, you're on mute. There we go.
Yes, there was an announcement on the zero emission buses to introduce 50 of those, and then an ambitious target of getting to 100% by 2030. But maybe, and I think it's very important that we focus on the environmental issues and so forth. But going back on some of the question on the changing in work patterns, I think that is it's a very good question. And for me, that's a really big driver for the mobility, because it will depend on, it will show whether people will travel into the CBDs and commute or not, or travel and work from home. And it's a substantial part of our patronage. So I think going forward, there's a huge opportunity for people perhaps to continue to adopt flexible working. And in transport, we've been experimenting with a number of pilots on how different teams can work. And we found that 90% of people prefer to work a few days a week in the office and the rest at home. And they found that very much they wanted to come to the office when it was to collaborate. And another thing they found is that different teams have different needs of working, so that it had to be fit for purpose. So it's quite interesting things that we found. So I think there's going to be perhaps an increased flexibility of how people work and when people work, and that will have an implication on our transport networks. And for me, it's a great opportunity then for people to think not just which day do they come to work, but what time do they come to work. So if they can come from the middle of the day towards the end of the day, we'll be able to flatten our transport peak, and that has many benefits. And also thinking about the weekends, and then also we're thinking about, we talked about CBDs is often driven by office work hours. But if CBDs change, and especially in the Sydney CBD, there's more shopping, there's more entertainment, more cultural, more residential. Perhaps we can change the mix of that and have it a more 24-hour economy as well. So that would change the mobility patterns and also revitalize some of our CBDs. So I can see quite a few opportunities arising from ongoing flexible working arrangements, and that's obviously the large employers need to be able to permit that, and also workers will need to want that, and that's horses for courses for the different teams how that works. But for me, that's it is. I don't have a crystal ball how that's going to materialize, but I think that's going to have a really big impact on transport networks going forward, as well as some of the environmental points we just talked about.
Thank you, Joost. Alison, Canberra. You know, I'm sure the workforce is still ever active in Canberra, having to serve as Parliament, but nevertheless, your thoughts on both the environmental end of the exercise and that potential to reinvent the way we think about peak hours and work patterns?
Yeah. Look, I think we're just going to reinvent the way we think about lives, and part of the flexibility, for people with families. I know personally my work-life balance is actually, while it's been a massively busy work year, actually spending some more time at home has probably been a positive thing from my family's perspective. And so that's one thing I think, a lot of particularly women get out of some of the flexibility that has been introduced. But absolutely, the zero emissions has all the way through COVID been a key priority for our government. And there was a number of announcements in the lead up to our election around our own targets. Who knows, after last week's New South Wales announcements, maybe we'll become even more aspirational, because we do like a good competition. But we're certainly hoping that we can leverage and work with New South Wales, because we see that, I guess this has taught us you really have to be proactive and prepare. And we do see climate change as something that will have fundamental impacts on the way society operates, on our health system, on the way we move around into the future. And zero emissions is part of that, getting ready for that. I also think the flexible working is part of the response to reducing our emissions and meeting our emission reduction targets in the ACT as well. And that actually having some people work from home actually does reduce congestion and some of the private transport emissions, which is of course the biggest source of emissions in our transport system. And so that's kind of an interesting side benefit that's come out of this as well. But, I think we just keep flexible, wait and see, and we'll adapt our transport systems to support the community and what its needs are. And that's what transport systems are there for, really.
Thank you so much, Alison. Neil, I saw you smiling there. Clearly something had pressed a button for you. And we know Queensland is the home of great open spaces and clean air. So I'm assuming you definitely have a position on the ZEB piece of the puzzle.
I think hydrogen vehicles will certainly be propelled forward, and we've now got a minister who's responsible for other things on hydrogen production. But I think if you look at what the pandemic's done for the world, you can see the sky now in Shanghai, and when you're in Delhi, you can see the mountains. And for the first time ever in my career, which is over 40 years now, I saw the price of fuel or barrels of oil go negative. So I think it's a massive opportunity to travel less and travel more actually in your village, if that's the right sort of terminology. So in addition to what colleagues have said, I think that there's a massive reset for our lives, particularly working from home. And we found, even with all this stress of, COVID-19 and what does it mean and what does it mean for jobs and the economy, I think the ability to work from home, at least see your family and interact with your family, is been a massive pressure release valve, and we don't want to lose that. So because we're only borrowing the world from our children and grandchildren, I think, we've got a massive opportunity here to be able to do something, really positive. And it's not just the technological solutions, but it's the lifestyle solutions as well. And this is really the lucky country, and I've worked in previous careers in 33 different other ones, and this is definitely the best one of the lot.
On that very happy. Helps if I unmute myself. Sorry about that. On that very happy and positive note, Neil, I'd like to just go to Nick now, and just from, you know, Victoria's point of view, because it has been that amazing sort of pressure cooker laboratory almost environment in Victoria. Well, how do you see the sort of environmental outcomes being positive out of this, and potentially the structural social change too?
Yeah, definitely echo a lot of the other speakers' comments. If we could get everybody within that 10 to 15K limit of the CBD, cycling and walking, that would be a major win. We're also seeing huge uptakes in our parks and bicycle paths, particularly through lockdown. And so there's, you know, bike sales, push bike sales went through the roof. There's a lifestyle change inflection point there that we could really encourage. So we're doing temporary bike lanes and all of the things that we can work with the central business district employers, large employers, to do end of trip facilities in a better way, and looking at what role that we play in that as a department. But you know, that'd be one that we can absolutely put a lot of effort into, and we will see some health benefits flow from that, obviously, with people being more active in their communities. The City of Melbourne, we're converting a lot of car parking spaces into parklets. So restaurants are coming out onto the streets, and that was because we were allowed more outside than inside. Fortunately, I'm very pleased that the Premier announced on Sunday night that we'd also increase dining inside, but I don't think we'll change the parklets back very quickly. I think they'll become a very important part of Melbourne's outdoor dining scene over summer. So the behavioural change around working from home, I think, will stay with us here. You know, show of hands across major businesses in Melbourne recently on a call. You know, 90% of businesses were saying, yeah, 3 or 2 days a week for each of their staff is likely to be office time, and providing flexibility. So, you know, we will see that. I also see a huge opportunity for regional Victoria. We've got fantastic regional Victorian services now, and we are seeing a growth in property prices in regional Victoria as people go, you know what, I can hold down a very busy job from Ballarat or Bendigo or Warrnambool or Shepparton. And these are all places that we've recently increased services to. So lots to be gained. Echo the work-life balance. I too are caring for an elderly person here at home, as opposed to having her in aged care, which was a decision we made quite fortunately. So yeah, that's been a really big part of my life for this COVID and period, and one that has been really important to me and my family.
Thank you so much, Nick. Simon, I'm just wondering if you wanted to make a roundup comment in that space on what you're seeing globally too.
Well, I think everyone's comments reflect in large part the experience of others. The difference between Australia and elsewhere is that we've emerged to something more like a new normal, whereas others are stuck in this zigzag between, you know, in and out. And so, you know, touch wood, we stay where we are for some time, and we can establish a new normal. But I think, as Neil said, there isn't really anywhere else in the world you'd rather be right now than right here.
Absolutely true. And look, I'd like to thank everybody today for taking part. We really appreciate your frankness, and the capacity to engage on this sort of conversation, I think, is really important for everyone to understand where, you know, the public transport system and so many ancillary parts of the puzzle that are now intrinsic to it in terms of place and all sorts of things are going to be handled. I would say, as Neil mentioned, we have put out a report on COVID, what now, you know, what's happening with the public transport system, what's likely to occur, and we have seen quite a bit of support for face masks on public transport and people still being a bit concerned. I think that's a reflection of the fact that government agencies around the country are doing extraordinary work to make it safer. It's probably now just the message making that needs to get out there more strongly, and that's not unique to public transport. That's something we're seeing in every area, from aviation to hotels, across the board here in Australia. But look, can I just thank you all for the amazing work that you have been doing as part of getting that public transport system to continue working in impossible circumstances, and then to actually look so proactively at what might be possible in the future. So bravo, all of you. Thank you very much for taking part today. Thank you so much, Simon, for a brilliant piece of management of the conversation. We look forward to seeing you all again at another TTF webinar or possibly face-to-face function very soon. And can I wish you all a very, very happy, very safe and very joyous Christmas, because I think we all need one. So thank you all and take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Margy.
Bye.